The 8-foot tall ghost. Hello, this is a story from my high school vacation. My grandfather's house is about a 2-hour drive from where I currently live. It's a typical rural farmhouse, but I really like the countryside atmosphere, so I started going there occasionally on my motorcycle since high school. However, the last time I went there was just before entering my senior year of high school, so it's been over a decade since I've been there. What you need to know is that it's not that I didn't go, it's that I couldn't go. During the spring break after my sophomore year of high school, on a day when I was completely free without any plans, the weather was so nice that I felt like riding on my motorcycle to my grandfather's house. Upon arriving to his house, I laid down on the wooden porch to feel the breeze, propping my head up with one arm, and just stared at the sky without a care in the world. A cool wind flowed pleasantly over my body, and the warm sunlight wrapped around me, keeping me from getting cold. Then all of a sudden, a strange sound reached my ears. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded like a human voice. And it was a sound somewhere between po and bo, hard to distinguish. Curious, I looked around and discovered a wide-brim, white woman's hat appearing over the fence. The hat moved sideways, and when it reached the end of the fence, a woman appeared. It turned out that her body had been hidden by the fence, and she was the one wearing the hat. She was wearing a white dress, the same color as the hat. However, the fence was over 7 or 8 feet tall. I wondered how tall she must be to be taller than the fence. As I mindlessly stared at her retreating figure, she eventually disappeared from my sight. And then the sound also stopped. At that time, I casually thought that she might be a tall woman wearing extremely thick-soled boots or heels, or perhaps a tall man in drag. Later that day, while talking with my grandmother and grandfather who had returned from the fields in the afternoon, I suddenly remembered and mentioned it. I saw an incredibly tall woman earlier. Could it have been a man in drag? But they seemed uninterested and responded simply with, "Oh, is that so? I mean, she was taller than the fence. She was wearing a hat and making this strange bop 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 sound while walking around." The moment I said that, my grandfather's expression changed completely. Feeling a bit perplexed by my grandfather's reaction, I finished describing the woman I saw. He then put on a serious face, deeply pondered for a moment, and went into the next room to make a phone call. I couldn't hear what he was discussing on the phone, but it was clear that my grandmother, who was sitting in front of me, was trembling. After finishing the call, my grandfather returned to the room and told me to stay the night, insisting that he couldn't send me home no matter what happened. I desperately wondered what I had done wrong, but no thoughts came to mind. After all, it wasn't me who went to see the woman. She appeared on her own accord. My grandfather hurriedly prepared to leave, saying that he was only going to pick someone up and then drove away. When I cautiously asked my grandmother what was going on, she told me not to worry and that I had been enchanted by the 8-foot tall ghost, and that my grandfather would somehow take care of it. My grandmother began to slowly tell me about the ghost while we waited for my grandfather to return. It is said that there is a 8-foot tall ghost in this area. The 8-foot tall ghost takes the form of a large woman and makes a strange laughing sound in a masculine voice. According to those who have seen her, she sometimes appears as a woman in a traditional dress, or sometimes as an old woman in a kimono, and sometimes as a middle-aged woman in work clothes. While her appearance varies, the commonalities are that she is female, abnormally tall, wears something on her head, and makes an unsettling laughing sound. There are rumors that she followed travelers here long ago, but that's not confirmed. She can't go to other areas because obstructions or totems have been set up in all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, of this region to seal her in. Like all those who have been cursed by the 8-foot-tall ghost before, it is said that if you are cursed by this ghost, you'll die within a few days. My grandfather returned with an old shaman. The shaman looked at me and immediately handed me an amulet, saying to keep it with me. Then he and my grandfather went upstairs to a room that had been empty and began doing something. From that point on, my grandmother stayed with me continuously, even following me to the bathroom and leaving the door open. At this point, I thought to myself, something really serious must have happened, and I became scared. After a while, I was called upstairs to the room where my grandfather and the shaman were. All the windows were covered with newspaper, and amulets were attached over them. In each corner of the room, plates were piled high with salt. Additionally, there was something like a wooden box and a small statue placed on top of it. There were also two bamboo
small
sticks,
pots that I
though
could
I'm
use
not
for
sure where they
bathroom
came
use.
from. The sun will set soon. Listen carefully. You must not leave this room until tomorrow morning. Neither your grandmother nor I will call for you, so if anyone calls you, do not listen. Come out at 7 a.m. tomorrow. I've already informed your parents, my grandfather said with a stern expression, and I had no choice but to nod. Remember what your grandfather just told you and adhere to it strictly. You must always keep the amulet with you, said the shaman who came with my grandfather. Then I was left alone in the room. They said I could watch TV, so I turned it on. Even though I was watching, there was nothing registering in my mind. I had no desire to eat the rice balls and snacks that my grandmother had prepared. I just crawled into the blanket and shivered. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because when I woke up, an infomercial was playing on the TV, and it was past 1 a.m. according to the clock. This was at a time when there were no cell phones. Feeling uneasy and waking up at such an odd hour, I was startled when I heard a tapping sound on the window. The sound wasn't like someone throwing a stone. It was more like a light tapping with a hand. I didn't know if it was the wind or if someone was tapping on the window, but I desperately wanted to believe it was just the wind. I tried to calm myself by taking a sip of water, but it didn't go down easily. I was so scared that I turned up the TV volume and focused all of my energy on watching it. Then, I heard my grandfather's voice from outside the door. If you're too scared, you can stop. I almost opened the door without thinking, but then I remembered what my grandfather had told me and I quickly stopped myself. Another voice came. Why are you doing this? If it's too hard, just come out. It was unmistakably my grandfather's voice, but at the same time, it wasn't. I don't know why, but I had a feeling this would happen. When I thought about who it could be, chills ran down my spine. I looked at the plate of salt in the corner of the room and noticed that the top layers had turned black. I was crouching, trembling, clutching the amulet when I heard the voice from earlier in the day, and suddenly the window started shaking like crazy. I couldn't think of anything else. The image of that thing from earlier in the day reaching up from below the window with a smiling face and shaking the window flashed through my mind, and I felt like I was going insane. I then decided to pray to the small statue on the wooden box with all my might. It was a really long and agonizing night, but morning eventually came, and I opened my eyes and the morning news was on the TV I had left on. The time displayed in the corner of the screen was 7:13. And there were no more tapping sounds or voices. I must have fainted at some point. The salt in the corner of the room had turned completely black. Just to be sure, I checked my own watch, and it showed the same time. Cautiously, I opened the door, and there were my grandfather and the shaman waiting for me. They were there crying, saying, "Thank goodness! Thank goodness!" When I went downstairs, my father was also there. When I heard my grandfather's voice from outside telling me to come out, I saw a minivan parked in the yard, and a few men who looked like villagers were standing there. The minivan had 9 seats. My grandfather was in the driver's seat, my father in the passenger seat, and the shaman was also sitting in a chair between them. I was made to sit in the very center, so 8 people surrounded me. Bow your head and never open your eyes. Even if we can't see it, you can. Keep your eyes closed until we say it's okay. A man who looked to be around 50 and who was sitting to my right spoke. The car started moving. After driving for a while, the shaman sitting in the passenger seat began chanting prayers, saying that this was a critical point. Suddenly, from outside the window, that sound came again. I was clutching the amulet the shaman had given me, my eyes closed and my head bowed. But just for one moment I accidentally opened my eyes and looked to the side. A woman in a white dress with long arms and legs, her joints bending in strange directions, was running right next to the car. Her head was higher than the window, so I couldn't see it, but as she seemed to be trying to bend down and look into the car, I involuntarily let out a gasp. "Don't look!" the man sitting next to me said angrily. Startled, I tightly closed my eyes and gripped the amulet even harder. All of a sudden, something started hitting the glass window. It seemed that the people sitting next to me couldn't see its form or hear its voice, but they could hear the banging sound. Some people were breathing heavily, and every time the window was tapped, someone even let out a scream. Despite all this, we somehow arrived outside the area where the village's protective totems were placed. We got out of the car to switch to another car that my father had prepared in advance. My grandfather was bowing his head in thanks to the man who had came with us, and when I tried to open my hand and was clutching the amulet, my fingers wouldn't straighten as they were stiff with terror. The crumpled amulet had turned black as if it had been burnt. The shaman and my grandfather said that once we were out of the village, the 8-foot-tall spirit would not be able to follow us, so we would be fine. The shaman gave me another amulet just in case, and my father and I returned to home via the road. I eventually settled back into normal life where nothing had changed and lived without any incidents for over a decade. My grandfather, grandmother, and the shaman have all passed away, and the reason I'm writing this now is, according to another story I heard, the day before yesterday an outsider was drunk driving and had an accident near the village. The car crashed and broke one of the protective totems. Since yesterday, a familiar sound has been coming from outside my window. Last messages. Police 1. Are there any records of messages sent during the incident? Police 2. Yeah, here they are. I love you, Mom. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. I think he's outside my room. I hear sirens, but they're far away. I'm hiding in the closet. I hope he didn't hear me. Hang on, I heard something downstairs. The cops are already here looking for him. They'll catch him. Don't worry, Mom. I'm safe. I love you. The cops said he's some escaped serial killer and he's been breaking into homes around the area. Yes, Mom, it's on the news now. I'll keep my doors locked. Oh, wait. The most recent messages are displayed at the top. Let me reread it for you. Yes, Mom, it's on the news now. I'll keep my doors locked. The cops said he's some escaped serial killer and he's been breaking into homes around the area. Don't worry, Mom. I'm safe. I love you. The cops are already here looking for him. They'll catch him. Hang on. I heard something downstairs. I'm hiding in the closet. I hope he didn't hear me. I hear sirens, but they're far away. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. I think he's outside my room. I love you, Mom. These were the last messages of the victim. I'm hungry. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening, a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late, and the buses stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus the next morning. Minji was very reluctant, because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea. But he was begging her, and eventually she relented. They went back to her one-room apartment, and she got into the bed, while he laid a blanket out on the floor, and they both fell asleep. A few hours later, at maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says. "Let's go get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now? It's 2 a.m. Go back to bed." But the student insists. "No, I'm so hungry. Let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen and he can fix himself some. This doesn't satisfy him. He doesn't want ramen. "There's a 24-hour place just down the road. Let's go there," he says. Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out. As soon as they're on the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They call the police and discover that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under the bed, for over 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on the floor and had a clear view under the bed. Christmas list. "I want some toy cars and a toy lizard and My 6-year-old son, Jeff, was sitting next to me on the bed, thinking. I was typing what he wanted for Christmas into my laptop so that I could email it to Santa Claus. Actually, I planned to just email it to myself. I didn't believe any of the email addresses that said they were the real Santa. I wanted to be careful because there's a lot of weird people online. "Is that all?" I asked Jeff. He's a simple kid who doesn't ask for much. Jeff nodded. "That's all I want," he said. I smiled and sent the email. "Now we wait for Christmas," I told Jeff. He smiled, jumped off the bed, and ran to play with his toys. The next day, Jeff was at school, and I checked my email. I was surprised to find an email about your son's Christmas list from an email I didn't know. It said, "Hi, Christina. I saw Jeff's Christmas list. You don't need to buy the toy cars or toy lizard. I can send them for you to give to him on Christmas. And yes, Jeff has been a good boy this year. One of the best. Signed, Santa Claus. Ho, ho, ho." I was confused. Who sent this? How did they know my name or Jeff's name or what he wanted? I thought maybe it was a friend from work playing a joke. I had talked to my friend about what our kids wanted for Christmas. Maybe one of them made a new email to trick me. I deleted the email and forgot about it. Soon it was the Christmas holiday. I sent Jeff to a friend's house and bought the toys he wanted and some gift wrap. Back at home, I saw another email from the same strange email address. It said, "Hi, Christina. I saw you bought the gifts. That's okay. I'll give Jeff a surprise gift instead. He's a good kid and would make a great helper for making toys. I'll take him to the North Pole on Christmas, but don't worry, I'll bring him down to visit you every now and again. Signed, Santa Claus. Ho, ho, ho. I felt worried. No one knew I bought the gifts. This was weird. I replied back very angrily. I asked them to tell me who they were and to stay away from us, or I would call the police. Days passed with no reply. I thought maybe they got the message and left us alone. I forgot about it until Christmas morning. Jeff was sleeping, and I wrapped the gifts and put them under the Christmas tree. The next morning, Jeff wasn't making any noise. Usually, he would be excited. I looked at the clock. It was 8. That was late for Jeff on Christmas. I went to check on him. I knocked on his door and looked inside. He was in bed, covered up. "Jeff?" I said. He made a strange noise. Was he sick? I touched his head. "Wake up, Jeff." Santa came. Then I felt strange bumps on his head. I got scared when Jeff turned to me. His ears were pointy and furry. His face looked like a dog's snout. He showed me his arm. Instead of a hand, there was a hoof like a goat's. I was shocked and couldn't talk. Then someone knocked at the door. I ran downstairs to see who it was. I looked through the door's peephole. A man with a white beard and a red jacket was outside. I had locked the door so he couldn't enter. Then I remembered the strange emails. I checked my phone and there was a new email from that same address. "Hi, Christina. Since you didn't want Jeff to be a helper, I turned him into a reindeer. My old reindeer are tired and I need a new one. I'll come to get Jeff. Signed, Santa Claus." Ho, ho, ho. I felt like I was going to faint. I read the email over and over, trying to understand it while the man kept knocking at the door. And then he said,
"I know you're in there. Open up. Ho, ho, ho."
I should have read the reviews. My girlfriend left 3 weeks ago. My cat, Ruck, liked her a lot. Now she's gone, and Ruck seems lonely when I'm not home. I even found ripped curtains and torn up toilet paper. One day, he ripped a big hole in the sofa. I knew I had to do something. I tried different toys and special cat treats, but it didn't work. Then, I found a pet camera online. It's a small camera and lets you watch your pet when you're not home. You can even talk to your pet through it via the microphone. I immediately ordered the camera and got it the next day and set it up in my bedroom where Ruck likes to hang out. The next day when I went to work, I checked the camera many times with my smartphone. When I talked through it, Ruck seemed happier and he didn't destroy anything. After 4 days of using the pet camera and talking to Ruck, I thought I had fixed the problem. But then, something strange happened. I got into bed with Ruck and received a message from the pet camera on my phone. I thought it was probably nothing, but I checked it anyway. What I saw scared me a lot. It was a video of a tall, skinny, strange man coming into my room. He walked in a funny way and got really close to the camera, looked directly at it, and smiled with big yellow teeth. Then he quietly went under my bed. I paused the video and looked around. There was no one there. That was kind of weird. I looked at the camera reviews online. Most of the reviews were very positive. People were very satisfied with the camera. But then I found one customer complaining that the camera was on a time delay, sometimes as much as 15 minutes. Now I'm in bed, and I know that man is under it. I could call for help, but maybe it's too late. So please always read the reviews before buying something. My boyfriend is drugging me. Last month, I noticed that something was off with my boyfriend. He was being too nice recently, like cleaning up his dirty dishes and being attentive to my needs. I would have thought this was a good thing if only I hadn't caught him waking up in the middle of the night and leaving the house. I tried waiting for him to come back, but I fell asleep after some time, and the next thing I knew, he was back in bed with me. That morning, it suddenly clicked, like I found all the pieces to the puzzle. That's why he was acting so nice. And recently, I would admit that we haven't had sex for a while, and I thought he just wasn't in the mood these days. Now I know why. He's been cheating on me. I was furious and heartbroken. I told my best friend, Natalie, all about it, and she was as heartbroken as me. She kept asking if I was sure about it. I mean, think about it. What other explanation could it be? He'll be gone the whole night and come back in the morning just before I wake up? I mean, what do you think he did? Buy some milk? I said to her that I have a plan. I'm going to wake up before he does and catch him red-handed. My best friend just nodded and said that it was a good idea. That night, my boyfriend prepared a nice meal for me, something he hadn't done before, and I was mildly surprised. I pretended not to know anything about his infidelity, so our conversation went normally. However, when we finally settled back into bed, I had fallen asleep almost instantaneously. My sleep was so good that I wasn't able to wake up at midnight. I was disappointed with myself. How could I have just slept in? What's weird is that in the following nights, that kept happening to me. I couldn't wake up in the middle of the night. I also tried staying up all night, but at some point, I would fall asleep. That's very unusual, since I have been a night shift employee before, and I didn't have this kind of trouble of suddenly falling asleep. Sometimes, I couldn't even remember what happened last night. I suddenly thought, maybe my boyfriend is drugging me, putting something in my food or drinks to make me sleep through the night. That's the only possible explanation I could think of. But then I asked myself, how did he know about my plan? My heart sank as I realized the answer to the question. Natalie, my best friend. I couldn't believe it. Why would she betray me? Is she my boyfriend's lover? At this point, I was so angry, I skipped dinner and drank only water from the tap. I made sure none of my boyfriend's drugs would reach me. Still, my boyfriend was persistent that I at least eat something small or drink some milk. To me, that was a confirmation that he was indeed drugging me. I was about to confront him about his infidelity right then and there, but then I suddenly felt a blunt force hit me at the back of my head and I was out. When I woke up, I was tied up in my bed and my boyfriend was watching me at the corner of our bedroom. He was biting his lips and looked very nervous. What is this? What are you doing? I asked him. His eyes lit up when he saw me awake. He then ran to our living room and called someone. My heart sank when I saw who it was. It was Natalie. I yelled immediately after seeing her. It was you! How dare you! I shouted at her. Natalie asked me to calm down. It's not what you think, she kept repeating. I'm gonna kill both of you when I get out of here. I kept trying to free myself, but eventually I gave up. They used some of the thickest ropes I've ever seen. Babe, listen to me, my boyfriend said. I'm not cheating on you, and certainly Natalie and I have no romantic relationship. I get out of bed every night because I need to stay safe. Stay safe? I asked. Safe from what? From you, he answered quickly. What? John, it's nearly 3. We should get out of here, Natalie whispered. My boyfriend then took out a paint bucket and painted my hands and legs with red paint. I was so confused and I struggled as he did it. All the while I was thinking, who is this person? Is this really my boyfriend? How could he do this to me? And as if he could hear me thinking, he kissed me on the forehead and said, You'll understand everything tomorrow. I promise." Before I could reply, he and Natalie ran away and I was all alone in our bedroom. I kept screaming for help, but I knew it was pointless. My mind was racing as fast as my heartbeat. My lungs felt like they were shrinking as I breathed the air. No, no, no! How could they do this to me? Why are they doing this? I kept trying to free myself, but I got exhausted at some point and blacked out. When I woke up, I was still in bed, but I noticed that the ropes that bound me last night were roughly severed and my wrists burned like hell. I looked around the room. I understood John. The floor, the walls, and the ceiling as well were full of red handprints.
My handprints.
The last broadcast. Brian was a night owl, fascinated by vintage treasures. His latest hobby was spending late nights tinkering with and listening to antique radios he'd picked up at thrift stores. His friends joked that he needed a better hobby. One night, Brian stumbled upon a broadcast that made his heart stop. He suddenly heard a shaky human voice. "If you're listening to this, I need your help. Please listen to me. Whatever you do, do not look outside your window from 3:13 to 3:17 a.m. Brian chuckled. This had to be a prank. One of my friends is probably just trying to mess with me for fun. But then he noticed the time. 3:12 a.m. He felt his heart rate pick up. It's just a prank, he told himself. But as the clock ticked to 3:13 a.m., he felt an irresistible urge to look outside the window. He fought the temptation, focusing his eyes on the design of the vintage radio. Then the broadcast resumed. "You're doing well. Whatever you do, do not answer your phone." Right at that moment, his cell phone started to ring on the table next to him. It was a call from an unknown number. Brian froze, staring at the screen as the seconds ticked away. Again, the radio voice. "If it helps, hold your breath. That should make you calm down a bit." The phone stopped ringing, and Brian exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. The time read 3:17 a.m. He thought it was over. But then his screen lit up with the text. "Why didn't you answer, Brian? I could have told you how to survive. You're running out of time. You need to get away now." The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. The broadcast came back. This time the voice was speaking in a calmer tone. "You'll hear a knock at the door. Do not panic. Just stay calm and be silent. And remember, don't answer your phone." Brian's heart pounded in his chest. With wide eyes, he silently waited for the next instructions from the radio. Suddenly, he got another text. "It's in the house. Run!" The radio voice then said, "He's in here. Get him!" Before Brian could react, he heard the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming from his living room. His phone buzzed one last time. The message read, "It was nice knowing you." Panic surged through Brian. He leapt from his chair, reaching for the door. It burst open before he could touch it. Emerging from the darkness was an abominable creature. Its limbs were long and grotesque, twisted in ways that defied anatomy. Its face was a warped parody of a human's, with deep eye sockets that glowed with malevolent white. In a flash, it lunged at Brian. He didn't even have time to scream. The creature seized him with its twisted limbs, lifting him off the ground. He looked at its awful eyes and felt an indescribable coldness seep into him, freezing his scream in his throat. In a matter of seconds, his body contorted unnaturally, as if being wrung out by the creature's hands. He felt his life drain away. his eyes wide open in eternal terror. The next morning, the police found Brian's apartment in shambles, the radio still playing static. Brian himself was dead, and his body contorted in an unnatural position, his eyes frozen wide open. The clock on the wall had stopped. It read 3:21. My dad sold my soul to the devil. Yup, just about as crazy as the title sounds. My dad is what they call a macho man. All he wanted was sons. He lived and breathed to have sons. Naturally, when my older brother was born, he was overjoyed. 3 years later, he begged my mom to have another son. And when he found out we were twins, he was excited to have 3 sons. So, when my brother and I came out, and he saw that I was a girl, he was very disappointed. I've always been his least favorite kid, and he never even tried to hide it. While he named my brothers Anthony and David, which mean priceless and beloved, respectively, he named me Lilith, which literally means night monster. While my brothers and mom tried to be nice to me and call me Lily, he insisted on calling me Lilith, so I could, as he said, feel the disappointment that he felt the day I was born. Clearly, him and my mom did not stay married, and quite unfortunately, he signed for full custody when Anthony was 5 and David and I were 2. Things got worse from there. If he took Anthony and David out to eat or see a movie, I was to stay home. He spent all his time playing sports with my brothers and wouldn't let me join, even though I, as a girl, actually showed a genuine interest in what he was doing with my brothers. When I was 4, Dad got cancer, and from what I heard, it was supposed to be terminal. That's where the title of this story comes into play. Yup, he made a deal with Satan. 15 more years of life if he sold one of his children's souls. And big surprise, guess who he chose? Me. So once I die, it's off to hell, no matter how little I sin or how much I pray. It doesn't matter. My fate is sealed. The first time I remember something happening to me was about a month after my dad made that deal. I was in my tiny, cramped room trying to sleep on a bed I outgrew years ago while my brothers and dad watched a movie downstairs when I saw it. This thing in my closet. Its face was light-colored, with thin, hollow eyes and an open mouth. Its long and bony fingers wrapped around my closet door. There was no question that this thing was a demon. I immediately cried for my dad, who stormed up the stairs and gave me a beating for interrupting his movie night with his sons. After that, he called me a stupid little girl for crying and locked me in the room. As I cried all that night, the demon simply watched me from the closet, unmoving. Demons watching me were pretty normal from then on. Sometimes it would be the light-skinned, skinny demon in my closet. Other times, a dark figure hovering over my bed. And on bad nights, a horned figure with glowing red eyes would stare at me, taunting me through the window. After a while, I stopped being scared of them. One night when I was 9, the gaunt creature was back in my closet, staring at me while I read. He began to make really weird growling noises, to which I shushed him. He then did something he never did before. While he would occasionally wrap his hand around my slightly open door, he would never actually come out of my closet. In one swift movement, he tore open my closet door and stood up fully, revealing that he was taller than the ceiling itself. He bent his neck in an abnormal way to fit under the roof. I should have been pooping my pants at this moment, but for some reason, I just wasn't that scared. We locked eyes for a while, which was more awkward than scary, so I just went back to reading my book. He just looked at me curiously for a while, until my dad decided he wanted to be a horrible person again, and threw open my door to yell at me for something or other. The entire time, the demon just watched. Thankfully, my dad left after slapping me across the face, but I was crying again for the rest of the night. The demon, who now looked at me with something more than just curiosity, looked into the hallway outside my door, trying to see my dad. As I did nothing but sob, the demon just sat down beside my bed, towering over me. Neither of us looked at each other the rest of the night. I cried while he just stared off into the distance, but I wasn't alone, and that was all I cared about. From then on, things changed. I wasn't just not scared of the demons. I welcomed them. Especially the skinny one who sat by my bed at night. He would sit with me whenever my dad was mean to me, or whenever I had boy troubles at school. He never talked to me and barely ever looked at me, but all I cared about was that he was there for me. I even gave him a name, Papa. I remember this one night. I was 14 and upset because Jacob, the boy I liked, didn't invite me to the Valentine's dance at our school. On top of that, my dad had gotten into one of his moods and had thrown a chair at me. When I ran into my room, I was almost relieved to see Papa crouched by the closet. "Papa!" I cried, running to him. It was stupid, I know. I was calling a literal demon Papa, but I had nobody else. He was the only one who had ever shown me any sympathy. At first, he stepped back, but as I cried even harder, he looked me in the eyes and stepped out of the closet. Then he did something surprising. He hugged me. As I felt his icy, cold hands wrap around me, I should have been terrified, but I was filled with love. Love for finally finding a dad who loved me. But one night, as I was doing homework for English class, I made a mistake. Papa looked curious, so I decided to read out loud to him. I guess I made too much noise though, because David opened my door. "Lilith, who the hell are you? What on earth is that?" He screamed, and my dad came rushing up. Papa couldn't hide in time, and now Anthony, David, and my dad all stared him down. He stood up, revealing his giant body, and David began to cry, while Anthony froze in place, and my dad ran off to get a bottle of holy water that he kept under his bed ever since the deal was made. As I tried to run away with Papa, he stopped me and shook his head. We both knew it was too late. I cried as I hugged him goodbye, and my dad approached us with the holy water and sprayed it on Papa. He let out a very loud cry that could have been heard from across the country. I watched in horror as Papa, who had stayed with me all these years, faded away into nothingness. "There, it can't hurt us anymore, sons," he said, embracing David and Anthony in a hug. I just laid over Papa's lifeless body, uncontrollably sobbing. We were all so caught up in that moment, we didn't realize something came up behind us. He was large, even bigger than Papa, and had 2 large horns, a goat's head, and a large stick in his hand. Dad turned around slowly, looking to this thing as he glared down at my abuser. "Your Majesty?"
We had a deal, Stanley. I granted you 15 more years of life on 2 conditions. 2.
It boomed, and I noticed David had wet his pants. "It was a misunderstanding, sir. My daughter..."
You were granted 15 years of life on the conditions that I get your daughter upon her death, and you never harm anyone ever again. Do you understand?
It asked. Yes, and I haven't, I promise." The creature laughed.
First you break a promise, and now you lie? To his satanic majesty himself? seeing you have not only harmed your daughter her entire life, but have killed one of my best minions. You have broken my trust. I'm breaking off the deal.
My dad got on his knees. "No, please, I'll do anything," he begged. Satan looked at me.
There is one way. If Lilith, your daughter, and the one you cursed, forgives you, I will set you free and you will live the rest of your life.
My dad slowly turned to me and put on a smile. Hey, Lily, look at me. I'm your dad, your papa. I raised you. Don't you love me? Don't be stupid, I'm your dad, he said, getting more agitated as I stared at him.
It's up to you, Lilith,
Satan said. I looked to Papa's body on the floor and then back to my dad. Come on, you gonna believe Satan or your dear old dad? My dad said, pleading to me. I glared at him. My dad is dead, bitch. You killed him. I said, I don't forgive you. And with that, Satan dragged my dad down to the netherworld, my brothers and I hearing his screams until it was far away enough that it faded away to where he could never hurt me again. As my brothers cried in the loss of their dad, I walked back to Papa on the ground and said, Goodbye, Papa. Thank you. My fiancée and I are from California, but her family lives in Colorado, and they own a cabin near Pikes Peak, way up in the mountains. After visiting them, they recommended we stay at the cabin a few days. We are avid hikers, and we jumped at the opportunity. Colorado is very rich in Native American folk legend. Virtually every place you go used to belong to an indigenous community, and the few of them who remain keep the traditions and stories alive. Pikes Peak is no different. There are enough stories to give anybody the sense that the land itself is alive. Perhaps that has something to do with what is happening to us. Faye and I are currently at the cabin. It's day 4, and we were planning on leaving today, but things have gotten very strange around here, and it looks like we're going to be here for a while longer. We have enough food for a winter, and the heater is in stellar order, but the Wi-Fi is terrible, and there is virtually no cell phone reception. We feel isolated. I'm writing this all now to give you an update on what's happening to us, and I will post it online when the Wi-Fi is working. The first weird thing that happened was the snow. There was no snow in the forecast, so we packed light, but on our first night here, just our luck, a blizzard pounded the whole area. My little Corolla vehicle is basically a brick of ice outside, and there's no way I'm going to try to make the 6-mile drive down the mountain to the town. I can only blame myself for trusting Colorado in the spring. After a day, Thursday, of lovely hiking and sightseeing, some really unsettling stuff started happening. We returned to the cabin just before dusk. We found an enormous dream catcher dangling from a tree about a dozen yards from the back door. This wasn't the kind you're imagining, the kind you buy from a novelty shop. This was made from twigs and twine, and it's about 3 feet in diameter. Absolutely humongous. Neither Faye nor I were stupid enough to touch it. We're veteran horror movie fans, and we know that's how you get cursed. That night, while we were eating dinner, we heard a bunch of noises in the woods outside. Twigs crunching, leaves rustling. This isn't unusual, because we saw some elk and deer on our hike, but the sounds were slow and purposeful. They stopped and started and were rhythmic, like someone was circling our cabin. I used my really bright tactical flashlight to look outside from the porch, but there was nothing. We stayed in all day on Friday and just cuddled, hung out, played some of the board games we brought and some of the Super Nintendo games we had in the cabin. In particular, Donkey Kong Country 2, which I have considered stealing because it's the greatest game ever made. It snowed again, and after dark, we started hearing some more noises. Around 1 a.m., Faye woke me up and told me she was hearing a voice outside. I strained to listen, and I thought I could make out the sound of a man crying very far away, but his voice was drowned out by the wind, so I wasn't absolutely certain of what I heard. We went back to sleep, but again, around 4:45 a.m., we heard him more distinctly and closer. He sounded like he was calling for help, but he would dip into another language that I've never heard before.
Help. Help.
We called the ranger station at the bottom of the hill using my cell phone, and they told us they'd get up there and check it out. But we never saw them, and I doubt they ever came. On Saturday, shit got really scary. It snowed again in the morning, and I stopped getting service for most of the day. Faye and I watched movies and tried to Skype with her family, but that didn't work. She went to sleep early, around 8, while I did some photo editing on my laptop in the living room. She woke up crying hysterically. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she'd had a dream that she was lost in the woods outside and something was following her. I cuddled with her until she fell back asleep, and eventually I drifted off too. Faye woke me up around 1 a.m. She was absolutely beside herself. I've never seen her so afraid in my life, and just the look on her face really unsettled me. She told me that she heard the man outside again, but she recognized the voice. She was absolutely convinced that it was her grandfather's voice, and that he was wandering around outside begging for help. Faye's grandfather died when we were seniors in college, 4 years ago. I told her that she was dreaming, but then I heard the voice too.
Help me. Help me, please. Please help me.
I never met the guy, so I wouldn't recognize his voice, but it did sound different from the night before. It sounded older. I had to do everything I could to keep her from running off into the woods looking for him. Eventually, she realized that the possibility of it being him was absurd, so we put a movie on at a good volume and fell back asleep. My cell phone wouldn't connect a single call. What happened last night, Sunday, was the thing that has sent me over the edge. Essentially, the same thing happened. Around 1 a.m., at which point I was still awake, almost expecting the noise to happen, I heard the voice. This time, it was a woman's. Thankfully, it was distant enough that it didn't wake Faye. I walked into the bathroom and cracked the window open just a tiny bit. The frosty air that came through that crack seemed like a death sentence to me as a Californian. Nobody could survive outside for that long in that kind of weather, not without serious, military-grade winter gear. And yet, someone was wandering around out there, stepping on twigs and crying? Now, I'm a reasonable person, sometimes even skeptical, but I'm telling you, the voice sounded exactly like my mother's.
Help me!
My mom is alive and well and living in Southern California, so when I heard my mother's voice out here in the Rocky Mountains, I knew something was really wrong. I would know my mother's voice anywhere. I think we all would. And I am telling you, I'm about 90% sure it was hers, which is way too sure to not scare the living shit out of me. I grabbed my light and went outside with a blanket wrapped around me and my hiking boots on. There were tracks in the snow as if someone was drunkenly shuffling around. Maybe they were injured. The path went right up to the bathroom window and then back into the woods.
Help me!
Each time the voice called out, I shouted, "Mom?" Or, "Who's there?" Or, "Who are you?" And each time the voice receded further into the woods. I'm pretty sure it was trying to coax me deeper and deeper into the forest, away from the cabin. I'm still alive now because I'm not an idiot. I'm not gonna die like some moron in a bad horror movie. I went back inside and made sure we were locked down tight. Since I'm not able to call the ranger station, I'm posting this instead, and I will upload it to you guys when the Wi-Fi comes back on. It is now 9:30 p.m. on Monday. I've been able to get online twice today. I wish I knew more about electronics, but I'm a history teacher, so I don't think I can fix the Wi-Fi or predict when it'll work. Faye hasn't been feeling well since noon. She developed a stomach ache and has been intermittently throwing up. We both ate the same thing and I feel fine, so I'm not sure what it is. She sometimes gets like this when she gets worked up. Although I'm an atheist, she's very Catholic and is pretty convinced that something supernatural is going on. No need for alarm at the moment. She does not have a fever and I'm keeping her hydrated and in high spirits. It seems like she's getting a little bit better and she went to sleep about an hour and a half ago. Some more noises to report. Cackling. Repetitive vocalizations in the forest, probably 100 yards out. The tree line starts about 20 yards out, so this sound is coming from much deeper. Some movement spotted just behind the tree line at dusk, but it could be elk or deer. I couldn't really see very much. Keeping all the curtains closed, windows locked, furniture in front of the front door and back door, and I'm checking on Faye every half hour. Her dad will be here in the late morning to pick us up and dig my car out. If anything else significant happens, I promise I will update you guys. Hey there, my name is Navajo Joe, and my ancestors are Navajo Native Americans. I saw your post. Although we're not in or from Colorado, it sounds like you're dealing with a chindi, or an evil spirit. You were smart not to take down the Dreamcatcher. That and the snow are blessings from someone or something protecting you from the chindi. Dreamcatchers are very powerful tools used not just for dreams. They are meant to filter out the evil while allowing the good to flow through. The fact that the chindi stays out of the boundary shows the Dreamcatcher is working. Now, the snow. It might seem like a bad thing, but think about it. The snow is keeping you guys indoors at night when this stuff is happening. You are not wandering out for a midnight hike and second guessing going out to investigate too much. There are probably some old gods watching over you and protecting you. Next, your girl with the stomach problems. If you can find some local Native American medicine, get it. Normally, I would tell you to make some sage tea, but I'm not sure if there is any where you're at. Ingesting corn pollen or even a little natural tobacco could also help. You don't want the chindi following you home. Finally, chindi are evil spirits that will try to infect your life to feed off your misery and fear. Don't go outside or open the windows anymore. I cannot stress this enough. You're very lucky that that Dreamcatcher was up and keeping it away. If you go outside again when it's calling, you run the risk of it coming in. Stay inside, close all the windows and doors, and ignore this bastard till morning. Alright, good luck.